Welcome to the Expense User segment of Concur End User Training. Concur Expense is a module in which you can prepare and submit your travel requests and monthly expense reports, request cash advances if that feature is authorized for you, and reconcile all of your corporate card transactions. Everything we will discuss in this training is with the assumption that you have completed the prerequisite videos and have a basic understanding of Concur, its look, and its feel. If you have not already completed the following prerequisites for this training video, please exit and do so now. Exploring the My Concur homepage, creating and updating expense profile, creating a new expense report with credit card and out-of-pocket expenses, and printing and submitting an expense report for approval. In this end-user training, we will be focusing on the fair-sized aspects of Concur. We will not be going over all the mechanical pieces of Concur that are covered in the general training videos created by Concur. There are 2 videos in this expense user segment of training. In this video, video 1 of 2, we will discuss expense delegates and travel requests. In the second video, we will cover expense reports and where to find additional assistance. As an expense user, you can assign one or multiple delegates to take actions on your behalf. For expense reports and travel requests, you can give your delegate the ability to prepare, submit, and/or view these documents on your behalf. You can allow as much or as little of this access as you wish. You can assign a delegate on a permanent or a temporary basis. If you are an approver, you can delegate your approval and/or reporting rights. This will be covered in detail in the approver segment of Concur End User Training. Expense delegates can be assigned in your Concur profile. This image shows the different levels of access that you may delegate. Keep in mind that a delegate can function on your behalf on the expense side only. If you are a travel user and would like someone to be able to book travel on your behalf, this will be explained in the Travel User segment of Concur End User Training. We will now move into the specifics involved in processing a travel request. The image shown here is a travel request header. This is the first step in creating a new travel request. In Concur, any field with a red bar on the left side is a required field. The first required field for a travel request header is the request name. There is no defined naming convention for this field. Your department may have best practice requirements of their own. The next field, labeled Request Policy, is used to indicate whether the current travel request is a blanket request or a default request. The default request policy, which will likely be the majority of your requests, is used when processing travel for a single event. The blanket policy is used when you are obtaining authorization for multiple events occurring over an extended period of time. This could be weeks, months, even a year. In some cases, the blanket is used for a particular type of travel during the specified time period, such as recruiting or athletic teams traveling to games. As usual, dates of travel and the business purpose are required on a travel request. In the area of travel field, the option best suiting the current request should be selected. Please note that if the travel contains, let's say, in-state as well as out-of-state travel, the type of travel requiring the highest level of approval should be selected. In our example case, this would be out-of-state, as it would require VP approval. The funding that defaults into each request is that which appears in the user's Concur profile. Unless the user manually changes this funding, it is set to be their payroll funding as imported from Banner. Something to keep in mind is that if the user changes their default funding in Concur and something in their job status changes, their default payroll funding will be imported again and will override their manual changes in their Concur profile. Before moving on, please notice the circled tabs on the image here. These 2 tabs, Segments and Expenses, are important for the next steps in creating a travel request. If you are completing a blanket travel request, then the Segments tab would be the next step in completing that travel request. The Miscellaneous segment, depicted by the magnifying glass icon, is useful in some types of blanket travel requests. If your area does not require the amount requested on a blanket travel request to be broken down into what will be spent in different types of expenses, then the Miscellaneous segment may work for you. In this segment, you are only required to enter a dollar amount and comments. This way, you can request a lump sum on a blanket request, or when the amount is unknown, you can just enter $1 to process the request, since Concur will not allow $0 travel requests. Keep in mind that the requirements on blanket requests are set by your department, so please check with your supervisor and department on the specific expense breakdown requirements for blanket travel. For a default travel request, or to break out blanket request spending by expense type, you can skip over the Segments tab and move directly to the Expenses tab. The Expenses tab will show a list of expenses already added to the request in a pane on the left. On the right, you will find a list of the available expense types. When you select an expense type, a transaction record, like that shown here, will appear. The fields with a red bar on the left are required fields. In order to add this expense type to your travel request, all required fields must be completed. Once all of the necessary expense types are added, you can move on to the next step in completing a travel request. The next step in the travel request process is to allocate the expenses as necessary. Each expense in a travel request will automatically default to the funding source listed in your Concur profile. You can change the funding on the report header if the full request should be charged to a different FOP. If the request needs to be charged to multiple FOPs, you can do this at the header level. When you select Allocate, this image will appear. From here, you can split a report's funding by amount or by percentage. You can split it in as many ways as necessary. In most instances, you will only need to make changes to the index field and any subsequent fields. After the funding is as it should be, you can move on to the next tab of the travel request. The final step before submitting a travel request is to define the approval workflow for the document. Your default approver has been assigned by your department. You will not be able to delete or change your default approver on any Concur document. However, you can add additional approvers before or after your default approver. This is depicted in the image shown. The red text shows where your default approver will populate. There are many reasons why you may need to add an approver, some of these being charging the document to a FOP that your default approver is not in charge of, the travel is out of state or international, or if your department requires that someone other than your default approver sees your requests. If you would like to track where your document is in the approval process after you submit it, you can use the circled Audit Trail tab to do so. The Audit Trail lists who has reviewed your report, what was reviewed, and what modifications, if any, were made. You have completed video 1 of 2 in the Expense User segment of Concur End User Training. To complete this segment, please also watch video 2.